listening to the Jersey Guys Podcast, the show that talks about hard rock, heavy metal, AOR, and West Coast music. In-depth conversation and special guests are always on tap, so settle in and turn it up. Now, here are your hosts, Tom and Mark.
Hey everybody, Mark from the Jersey Guys Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Tom Coyne, and thanks for joining us. Today we've got a brand new episode for you where we talk with Robert Berry. Robert's got a brand new band by the name of 6x6, where he joined up with Ian Crichton from Saga and Nigel Glockler from the band Saxon. And so we're going to talk about that album, which came out at the second half of last year. It was a great album, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the work on the brand new 6x6 album, which should be out sometime in 2023. And we talk about Robert's whole career, really. People might know Robert from 1988 when he was in the band 3, which had Carl Palmer and Keith Emerson from ELP fame. And they had a great album titled To the Power of 3. And so we talk about that. We talk about Robert's solo career, his band Alliance, which he's released a number of albums over the years with. And we talk about everything that Robert's done. So it was a great conversation, and let's get right to this one with Robert Berry. Hey, Robert, thanks for joining us here on the Jersey Guys Podcast. Tom and I really appreciate you talking to us tonight.
Hey, Mark and Tom, I'm really pleased to be talking to you guys. I love the area you're at. I've played there a few times. I see that Mark and I have a little history from a place we played a couple of years ago, and I'm excited to hear what you guys are thinking.
Well, I wanted to start with congratulating you on the new 6x6 album. Just came out tail end of last year.
I am so pleased with that. As you probably know, that I was working with Keith Emerson to do another 3 album, and he died in the middle of it, actually committed suicide, which was really devastating, especially since doing the music together was kind of his happy place, and I had no idea what he was going through at home and health-wise and stuff, because this was his happy place. We were writing and recording, and doing stuff. So after that, my manager said, well, what are you going to do now? The 3-2 albums have done really well, and people seem to receive it quite well. And I said, I'd like to find a guy like Keith, but a guitar player, somebody that writes these iconic parts. With Emerson, you always can tell when he made up and he wrote something and played it, it sounded like him. Mm. And, there's only a few guitar players. We just lost one of the greatest, Jeff Beck. You could tell him, Eddie Van Halen, you could tell, maybe Richie Blackmore. I mean, there's some guys you can tell, but not a lot of them you can tell. Just you hear the first couple of bars, like Keith Richards. Oh, well, that's got to be the Stones coming on, right? You got those riffs going. Mm-hmm. And so my manager, Nick, over there in England, said, let's think about that. And he called me the next day, and he said, what about Ian Crichton? I went, oh, my God, I wouldn't have thought of Ian because he's always been with Saga. And he is exactly the kind of guy that's identifiable when you hear his playing. And I said, yeah, but why would he want to do something? He said, Saga. And it just so happened he was a 3 fan. We had played Canada back in 88, and we talked, and he was looking to do something. He wanted to do a 3-piece. And I wasn't especially thinking 3. I was thinking maybe a 4-piece. But I said, well, I'm willing to try that. Let's give it a try and start writing. So he sent me these little nuggets, just like Emerson used to, these things that were so uniquely like Ian Crichton's guitar playing that inspired me to write songs from him, and the lyrics and everything. He'd send me these weird titles. And sometimes they were James Bond movies, like we're working on now one called Wren, which is a bird. It has nothing to do with the song, but the little guitar part, he likes to name them things so he knows what they are in his hard drive. And sometimes they turn into the song, sometimes they're not in the title or anything, but it was just a match made in heaven. And I'm glad you've heard it, you're aware of it, and it seems to be well received by I hate to say everybody, but it's been really good.
Yeah, no. Well, you know what? Tom and I actually just recorded a best of 2022, and we got a pile of our favorite CDs from the past year. And Tom had that on his list there, right, Tom?
I had it as number one, actually, but that's...
Well, Tom, I think at this point we can remove Mark from the interview, and
I had it. You go. It's actually up on YouTube, so if you don't believe me, you could check it out. I had it as number one. Yeah,
that's great.
It's my favorite album of 2022.
I'm always going to give you a bad time, so prepare yourself.
No. Well,
we like
we're
that.
Much appreciated.
We're Jersey guys. We can take it. Well, I wanted to ask, and you kind of started to explain it, but I want to get the other guy that's involved in 6x6. How does an American and a Canadian and a Brit kind of get together and do this? You got Nigel Glockler, the heavy metal band Saxon.
Yeah.
So how did he come into the picture?
It sounds like there had to be some drinking in a pub or something, right, for me to make that happen. Actually, I was in England in '86. And Carl Palmer and I were trying to put a band together, and we worked with a bunch of people, Don Aries from Ozzy's band, and he was in Deep Purple, all kinds of different people, and it wasn't working. And all of a sudden I get a call from Steve Howe that says, look, Steve Hackett's leaving GTR. I've heard your cassette tape at the time, and he goes, would you like to come to the house and talk about it tomorrow? I said, wow, okay, yeah. Yes was top of my list at the point, too, of a favorite band. I went to Steve's house, got some songs from him. I took them back to my flat there, and I sort of rewrote them all to what I thought GTR would be doing the best as, and took it back to Steve, and he really liked that, and we got a writing partnership going, and I joined GTR. And one of the things I had mentioned was, God, that first album, the drums are so muddy, and are you going to use that same guy? He goes, no. I think we're going to bring in Nigel Glockler.
Really?
So, yeah, I didn't know who Nigel was. Yeah. And so I show up for rehearsal, and there's Nigel. He was such a nice guy. He told me just a year ago we got together again, he was really scared to go work with Steve Howe. He was nervous about it.
I bet.
And he was a prog head, even though he played in the metal band. Even at that point, he was playing with Saxon, and he left them. I'm not exactly sure why that happened, but he left them for GTR maybe. And I was just really impressed with how solid he was, but the feel, sort of like Alan White joining Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Bill was great, but Alan White locked it down in a different way. And I always remembered that. And when Ian and I had got about 6 songs written, I said, you know what? This is going to fly. We really need to, let's shop a record company, but we need a band too. What about a drummer? And I said, top of my list has to be Nigel Glockler. And he goes, well, I know him. We played with Saxon a bit, but I don't really know him as what kind of drums. I said, trust me, the guy will be our John Bonham. He'll just be so solid, but he can play the prog parts too. We can expand things. I got him down. I flew Nigel in to my studio here. I have a state-of-the-art studio with kind of the best of everything that I've accumulated over the years. And he did the drums to the songs, and we got it back to Ian, and Ian did some guitars at home, did some good stuff here. And it just worked. It's hard to say. It had the right ingredients for us all to fit. We sort of do exactly what we do the way we do it, but when it came together, it became something different than the three of us in the past. And so that's how Nigel got in.
Do you foresee yourselves doing any shows with this lineup?
Yeah, I've been a little bit down here the last couple of weeks because the plan was to tour in March. And the guy that is our promoter and agent over there got so busy doing a Jethro Tull tour that he couldn't get the dates put together because Jethro Tull, of course, is doing a huge tour over there, and he was overwhelmed. So it got put back to September. But it's going to be in Europe to start with. Right now, actually, we're looking for an agent in Canada and the U.S. to put some dates here and see what we can come up with. Both guys are excited to go out with 6x6. Of course I am, but I'm not in another band right now except for my band Alliance, which doesn't really play out. We do albums every 5 to 6 years, But that's the plan. September, September, October, Europe. And the hope is we find an agent here that can sort of open up some venues. One of the problems of being a new band, and we are brand new too, because it was my big idea. I thought it was so wise to not tell anybody until the album came out, until that first single came out, June, maybe it was last year. So nobody knew except for our wives and the manager, right? Let's keep it a secret. A record company we signed to, great record company, Sony Inside Out Records. And we kept it a secret. I thought this would be really cool to just come out and see what people think. Well, the only problem with that is you have nothing to talk about. You have no history. You have no draw. You don't have anything. You're just taking a shot, like rolling the dice, And it went big right away, around the world, really. But you have to be a little bit more, embedded in, sales and reviews and everything else to get the gigs with these promoters, because they have to see some results like track record. So that hurts us here more than it hurts us in Europe.
Right. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the writing process of this album, because when I heard it, I own pretty much everything you've ever recorded, so I know the quality is there. But the partnership with Ian on guitar, where did you come up with these songs? The songs are so strong on this album. Was it stuff you were sitting on for a while, or did you collaborate with Ian? And how did these songs come about?
Yeah, like I said before, Emerson had these little nuggets, these things he'd send me, and I'd make songs out of them. And I was looking for the same thing, but from a guitar player. And what's funny is Ian, half the stuff, a third of it maybe, was stuff that Saga, which of course his brother is the leader of, or was, he left the band now. But he was really hard on Ian's stuff, evidently what he sent in, because if it had a little or a little too much distortion, you go, all right, clean that up. We don't want to use that, So Ian had all these little incredibly great parts. We hear some of the intro guitar riffs, all the guitar riffs. I mean, honestly, everything guitar in that album is Ian's ideas. None of those are my guitar ideas. And what he had to do is between, those intro riffs and maybe some of the rhythms and things on the verses and a little hook here and there, he had to go back and figure out, once I wrote the song where it had the verses and it had the chorus chords and all the things, which a lot of times I do on a very simple keyboard because I didn't want to influence him. I want him to be who he is to the utmost, 110% Ian Crichton guitar stuff. So I'd make it very basic, but I'd have the lyrics, I'd have the song all laid out from beginning to end. If it's 4 minutes, if it's 6 minutes, whatever, it'd go from 0 to 6 minutes. And I'd put his little parts that he had sent me to make songs out of where I thought they should go. Kind of like a puzzle, where you look at, 500,000 piece puzzle, you got a couple of pieces missing. And he'd have to fill that in. So he'd revisit it. And we just sort of batted it back and forth like that. And now, with FaceTime and with Zoom, you don't have to be in the same room to have the same creative energy together. Yeah, it's just really been wonderful. And he and I really hit it off. It just worked. It's something both of us wanted to do. I was looking for it. He was looking for it. It's just he wasn't used to somebody gluing all those parts together into a complete song. And, of course, I was used to getting genius-level little parts from Emerson, but he was gone. And for me to get the guitar things that you're hearing on that album, at least half of them he sent me to make songs out of. The other half of what's on guitar he made up after I made the song. So it was meant to be. That's all I can say.
Well, he's one of the greatest secrets of guitar players that people don't know about. When you see all the great guitar players, you rarely see his name, unless it's guys that really, that know their shit. But the average fan never mentions this guy. And he's, not, aside from his chops, it's his quirky style of playing, which is, he has his own style, obviously. But he always manages to have these very melodic hooks inside all this, quirky, over-the-top playing, which is, very few guys could do that.
I don't know how he does it, honestly. He'd send me stuff that I'd go, God, I would never do that, but
Right.
damn, that sounds good. Right? There's no power chords. Yeah, there's no chunking along like heavy metal.
Never.
There's none of that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a Saga fan for 35 years, so I'm familiar with all their stuff, and a guy is a treasure. Like, people just don't realize how good he is, and the songwriting that's behind all his stuff.
Well, this freed him up, because I think sometimes in Saga, even when he's playing really cool stuff, it kind of gets lost. It's kind of a keyboard band, Saga.
Oh, yeah. Most of the times it's two keyboard players, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes the bass is on keyboards too, and which I love Saga. They're a great band. I've always liked them. But it doesn't sort of let him step out the way 6x6 does, where it's all on his back, which, by the way, we're another album now. And Ian and I both are feeling a lot of pressure. Because you can imagine we were so well received in the first one, and thinking, man, we got to make sure this one's really good.
Would you bring a fourth member out when you guys, or if you guys do play? Would you bring a fourth member out on? I would think you'd have to, right?
If we were on FaceTime or Zoom, I'd show you this little keyboard rig I've made here. I'll be playing bass and singing, of course, but I have these little tiny keyboards. The left-hand one's for bass, and the right one is for the keyboard pads, because the keyboards are very simple on the 6x6 stuff. And I can switch, as long as I can get there and not have to walk around this huge keyboard rig. I can just switch over to left-hand bass and right-hand keyboards when it's necessary. So I've put that together, and I don't have my software computer to run the thing, something called MainStage. I'm waiting for that. But I am trying to work it out where I could actually play bass guitar, and when it needs the keyboards, just slide into the keyboard thing, all the while singing, So it's a little bit of a Geddy Lee kind of job, but I think it can be done.
I just watched the Triumph documentary, and Mike Levine in Triumph used to do the same thing too. He had a keyboard rig and playing bass with one hand, playing keyboards with the other, and it can be pulled off. I'm sure you could.
I'm going to try. I'm a big Geddy Lee fan. I mean, the guy's amazing. He's seamless in all the stuff he does. I'm going to have a headset mic, and that's something I've never used before, but there's so much for me to do that I can't be. So we'll see. That's the plan. I have in my arsenal, of course, Andrew Collier, who's one of the great new keyboard players that I took on my 3.2 tour, and Mark saw him. He is just so solid. He's a doctor too.
Oh, wow.
So if you have any nutritional problems or back pain or anything on the tour, he'll be able to fix you.
Well, I was telling Tom just the other day, I had a little video on my phone of Talkin Bout when you did that in the Sellersville show, and we were watching the video, and I said, this keyboard player, he's so great. I said, he had this keyboard thing, and he was reaching over on the front, and he was like doing this thing, and I was really impressed with him.
Yeah, you're talking about the Rolly C board, it's called. It's rubber.
Oh, yeah.
Man, he makes that thing sing. And, I play keyboard, so I tried it, and the feel is so weird. It's like, it'd be like playing your couch if you had keys on. It just feels super weird. And he just got that touchdown, and it was amazing what he could do with that thing. Really great.
So I wanted to take you a little bit back in time in some of the back catalog stuff. Robert Berry, In These Eyes, that came out in South Africa. Could you tell me a little? I actually own this CD, if you could believe it. I actually own the CD. And I know it goes for like hundreds and hundreds of dollars on eBay now.
That was an interesting time because I was producing this girl, Michelle Chappell, and her husband was from South Africa, and he had a record label there. And he said, you could get right up the charts because radio is controlled by the government. And I do really well there. He goes, why don't you put an album together? I thought, I have these songs that are, they're not middle of the road, but they're not really rocking. The kind of musical, like a little bit more like an Asia kind of thing, but they went through different deals. And I really liked that album. I liked the mixture of all the things. when I put it together, I thought, this is great. So I put it on his label. He put it out, and apartheid ended, I guess you'd say, which changed the control of everything in South Africa. And the company went bankrupt, and radio wasn't controlled the same way it was. So a lot of good came out of that, but a lot of bad for me came out of it too.
Right, because
I thought,
right, there were probably like 50 copies in distribution at the time.
I think they put out 1,000 copies.
Really?
And I bought 100 of them, here because they were cheap, and I wanted to have them, and I probably sold a few, and I only have a couple of those left. I have to even find them. I try to keep one of each thing I do for each of I have 2 kids, so I got the box with one of each album I've done that someday they'll use to rekindle the fire or something. But I want to leave.
I'll tell you how I got mine. I was visiting Khalil Turk in the UK in the 90s, and he had one put aside for me. And that's how I got, because it goes for, anytime I've seen it show up on eBay or whatever, it goes for a ton of money.
Yeah, it's not around. Khalil, I'm trying to think I think maybe we had put out one Alliance album by the time this came out. I don't
You
remember.
did. That's how he was hooked in with you already. So he was already like, on everything you ever did. And that's how I got hold of that record.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And there were a few songs that ended up on the Taking It Back album, if I'm correct, right?
Yes, and that's the funny thing. Another record company that after the album came out went bankrupt. They went into business. It's like an American, like New York Records or something. I forget what it was called. It was a pretty strong label, and Khalil had set me up with that guy, I believe, over there, and they were doing well, but I don't know what happened. The funny thing on that album, I was playing with Sammy Hagar then, and I wanted to do a heavier rockin' album, and they wanted a heavier rockin' album. So I said, great. I wrote a bunch of songs, and I'm trying to think. I had a guy here in town that was just starting out with a photographer doing digital art, so I had him do the cover. And this, after 3 disbanded and all the things I went through, I decided to call the album Taking It Back, like taking my life back.
Mm-hmm.
They were goofing around. Now, I don't know which one you have, but the very first one, only about 150 copies got out. The graphic guy was goofing around, and him and the photographer were being funny because the photographer took my pictures, and they put the title as Taken In Back. And shot in the back, or worse, I'm next to San Francisco, you never know what the...
I would have to go look, but I think I have that, because I kind of now that you said that, I kind of recall there was a little bit of a little bit of backstage humor on that.
Yes, and I didn't know until I got it. They released it, and the record companies, even with the 6x6, we got our albums after other people did.
Right,
we got our copies. So it was out. And I was, oh my God, the titles! I was so mad at this
Taking
guy
it
here.
in the back, yeah.
He was moving around. He just never put it back,
Yeah.
And he sent it off. And in those days, mid '90s, I couldn't check it on my computer and stuff. I'd go down to see him, and of course, he didn't have that title on there on his computer, So yeah, I had them change it. I actually had to pay to have it changed. I think it cost me $1,000 in an advance kind of way too. It didn't come out of my pocket, but eventually it would have if they didn't go bankrupt. And that album disappeared, but I had a couple songs on there, like I think the first Somebody's Watching. I did another song called that with Keith, but the first Somebody's Watching was on there, and Life is I'm trying to shuffle. And Let's Start Living was on there. It's a favorite of mine. I played live a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really good album. It's really strong from beginning to end. It's one of my favorites.
But Taking It Back, just a song on there, was one of my favorites I had done. Someday that'll get released in a box set that I'm planning, but I don't know when that's going to be quite yet.
My next question is this: you take up with Keith Emerson and Carl Palmer, and what is it like to fill the shoes of Greg Lake, who's one of my all-time favorite musicians that I grew up with in the 70s? Was there a lot of pressure coming into that atmosphere, and how did you come into that atmosphere?
I'll tell you, it's funny that we're talking in New Jersey, too, because Carl Palmer, right here where I'm talking to you, Carl called me. Because Geffen was going to sign me as a solo artist, Geffen Records. And John Kalodner was a very famous A&R guy, was the guy developing me. And they were in trouble with John Wetton in Asia, so John Kalodner said to Carl, you ought to check this guy out. It's got a kind of a rock, a little bit of American thing in Asia might be good. And Carl liked my cassette tape again. And he called me right here, and I thought it was a joke. I was a friend of mine told me a joke. Oh, it's Carl Palmer, and a kind of a high voice, After I realized it was him, he said, look, the full circle, my manager, Brian Lane, is going to be in San Francisco in about 3 weeks with GTR. They're touring. And why don't you go and meet him, and then we'll get together. So I went there, and I met Brian Lane and saw Steve Hackett, and I saw that band a little bit. And Nigel wasn't the drummer then, though. It was Jonathan Mover at that point. And after I met Brian Lane, Carl called and goes, look, I've been talking to Joe Lynn Turner. I'd like us to meet in New Jersey and go to Joe's house, and him and Alan Greenwood, and that you and I might start a band.
Oh, wow.
I'm a big ELP fan, but I'm a big Joe Lynn Turner fan. I love his voice, right?
Oh, yeah, we do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, before Alan Greenwood and Foreigner, oh my God, one of my favorites. And so I meet Carl in New Jersey we met at the hotel because we flew in at different times. So he's there waiting for me. I get there and he goes, hey, Robert, how you doing? First I met him in person, He's a really lovely guy, lots of energy. We go up to the desk. It was kind of funny. The guy said, may I help you? And Carl says, yeah, Palmer and Barry. And the guy at the desk, this black guy goes, which one's Arnold and which one's Chuck? He just without dropping a beat, and Carl kind of looked at me like he didn't get, Arnold Palmer probably isn't.
Right, he doesn't know who the hell these guys are, right, especially Arnold Palmer.
But I'm cracking up. And so we went to Joe Lynn's rehearsal place, and it was kind of odd. There was a lot of ego and stuff involved between Carl and Joe that this was my first big break. I had a local band here that was doing really good, Hush, but I'd never worked with top-notch geniuses of the business, and the voice, oh my God, fantastic voice. And so it was kind of up to me to break this thing up because the chemistry was really bad. So I just told Carl, I said, Joe just told me he's not going to do any of our songs. We have to do his songs. Carl said, what? I said, yeah. Carl said, well, he goes, I'm going to go get my snare drum. Let's get out of here. And he picked his stuff up and we walked out. And that was it.
Wow.
And I've never told anybody that because they don't live in New Jersey. They wouldn't get quite the
right.
The ego thing between the two of them. I mean, here's Carl Palmer, one of the biggest arena bands ever, ELP, and Joe Lynn Turner, one of our great singers. And I got two roosters there, and I'm like,
oh, without a doubt. Yeah, totally. Because, Turner did the whole arena thing with Blackmore, too, so it's...
And here I am. I'm just a chicken kind of coming out of the egg, So I go home. That was it. Carl calls me. I want to fly out of London. Been talking to Don Aries. He wants to do something. And, I wasn't really thinking about having a three-piece band with a keyboard player, and that's the first thing that struck me, that Carl was trying to recreate something like ELP, and I thought, that's just not going to work with anybody but Keith Emerson. I didn't know Keith Emerson then, but I was willing to go try it, and we tried it, and Don was a lovely guy, but it just didn't have any spark kind of because none of us were sparking, basically,
Right.
We didn't do that. We tried a few other things, and that's when Steve Hackett called me. So after the thing with GTR, I had a really hard time with the bass player, but just because he was a wild, crazy guy. Phil Spalding, he's a great guy. I didn't have a hard time to want to quit, but the singer was super hard on me and just didn't want to let me do anything. And I was writing all the songs with Steve.
You mean Max Bacon?
Yeah, Max Bacon, yes.
Who has a phenomenal voice, or did.
Oh, my God, yeah. except for that, GTR did Talkin Bout, and you and I can say talking about, but Phil can only say talking about.
Right.
So when he's saying, I'm talking about you, it was like, oh, it's hard for me to deal with that perfect English kind of thing. But he made life really hard for me. He did not want me singing. He didn't want me really getting much credit for things. And he made it very clear, like when I went to sing the harmony parts, he'd stand next to me and he sings really loud and I don't. So he'd make sure I wasn't heard. Just silly stuff like that. And I could take it. It wasn't like I couldn't take it, but for some reason, after, a year of that, and I was there long enough for Arista Records to say, yes, we like the album demos. We're renewing the contract. You get your advance and everything. At that point, I said, I'm quitting. I told Brian Lane, I said, you know what? I know there's something better for me out there. And I know that I'm nobody and I haven't done anything, but this isn't what I want. And he was really upset with me and booked me a flight home. I think it was on a Wednesday. I told him on a Sunday. He called me on a Monday. He goes, Keith Emerson wants to have lunch with you before you head home. Really? I wasn't really nervous meeting Steve Howe. I was a big fan, but Steve was really mellow. He's easy to get along with. And it just felt good, But Keith Emerson, I thought, oh my God, this guy's not going to speak English. He's going to be like Einstein. He's talking equations. This is some kind of mad genius. I was really worried about it, and I'm just really easygoing. I'm not starstruck by anybody. I just thought, oh my God, Keith Emerson, my God. And we had a 2-hour lunch, and he was like talking to you guys. He was so comfortable. A couple glasses of wine, a little lunch. Telling me jokes, bad English jokes. It was magic for me to sit with this guy and see he was just a down-to-earth, real person. And honestly, from that point, when we were working together, they never had one good word to say about Greg Lake, so I never brought him up. Right? So,
oh, really? Is that? I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just brotherly kind of stuff,
Yeah.
You'd have to be there and work with these guys and know that Keith was a musical genius, but, financially and organization-wise and stuff, he was just a musician, that wanted to play music and didn't think about much else, except motorcycles and cars and stuff. But he wasn't the organized one. I know from working with him that Greg was the guy that was the glue, And Greg also had the hit songs and made the most money with the publishing, which was probably a bone of contention when one of the reasons they, had a little bit of animosity and stuff because, Lucky Man was Greg's in the beginning, and Father Christmas. You make publishing money on that, especially in those days. And the guy that writes the songs makes more money than the band. So there was that going on. And I finally got to meet Greg after ELP got back together, was kind of doing an oldies tour with Jethro Tull. And he was so nice to me. I thought he wasn't going to like me because I had done that little, a couple of year stint and, sort of, I don't know if he thought I broke up the band, whatever, but he was so gracious and so nice. And he takes a few pictures and put his arm around me, and he was a great guy. And I am a huge Greg Lake fan too. And people, most of the time when they announce 3 on the radio and interviews and stuff, they'd say, and here they are, Emerson, Lake, and Barry. And it made Carl crazy. He'd go, Lake's not in the band.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan too. During that period of time, he was also in Asia briefly, filling in for Wetton. He did that Budokan show, which is now out on very high quality DVD. I've only watched it about 10 times over.
Yeah, and nobody could have done that job. Nobody.
Oh, fantastic, incredible. And he was in the band with Gary Moore, the band that he had in the early to mid 80s with Gary Moore. He did a couple of records that are just tremendous also.
Yeah. I wish that I would have been able to spend more time with him and maybe even that he was in the band. He would have been, he played a lot of guitar. I could have been, you remember they were going to add Hendrix at one time, call it Help. I could have been Belp.
Yeah, now he was people didn't realize he was actually a really good guitar player too, because everybody thinks that ELP didn't have guitar in it. It did have guitar in it. It was him.
Oh yeah. So many people would write things about, well, I miss Greg. He should have been there in this 3 thing. And I'd always say, I'm a huge Greg Lake fan. It doesn't bother me that you feel that way because I like it too. I said, but I'm lucky to be able to do this. But I totally get it. I'm a fan.
Right. Right.
It never offended me once, really.
So I wanted to ask you now a little bit about Alliance and how that band with Gary Pihl came together. I know you had a string of records. Khalil, you were on his label for a while, and how that band all came about.
And it's funny, it's Gary Pihl, the way you say that.
Does he really pronounce it that way? I didn't know that.
We call him File. Hey, File.
I always called him Phil. I mean, I knew him from back, in Boston, and I just assumed it was Phil.
It's Pihl. I don't know why, but it doesn't look like Pihl. But that's what it. So I have my Hush had broken up. My band that did really well in the Bay Area here, and actually we toured a bit through the Midwest with Triumph and Black Oak, Arkansas. We had a pretty good run. We'd always open for Journey and all kinds of Huey Lewis, that kind of thing. And I broke that up because there was nowhere for it to go, and I put together the Robert Berry Band because I had all these songs that Hush couldn't do. They were a little more grooving, a little more whatever, a little more, not really progressive, but, well, they were like the In These Eyes CD. That was a Robert Berry Band material, stuff that I had written. And I didn't really know what was going to happen. I just knew I needed to do something different. And the radio station here, KOME, picked up on the album I had put out. And we were in their Rock Search thing, on one of these Bay Area favorite band contests, and we were representing the big radio station here. In the middle of that's when Carl called me, and I was going to England. And I didn't really have a band at that point, but John Collider had showcased the Robert Berry Band, and that's where he first found me and wanted to put me with Carl and different people. I'm trying to think here how the progression went with Alliance, because right at that time, it was probably a month before I was going to England, Jesse Harm, who was the keyboard player for Sammy Hagar, and David Lauser, the drummer for Sammy Hagar, came to see the Robert Berry Band at a club called the Cabaret, because John Kolodner at Geffen had said, Sam's going to Van Halen. This guy would be a great replacement for Sammy Hagar. Not that he's like Sammy Hagar, but the Sammy Hagar Band is so good, and this guy's got something going here. So, unbeknownst to me, they came to see me play, and my guitar player, Rob Fowler, who also does all my album covers, my websites, everything, he's a tremendous friend and a tremendous artist. He was a guitar player in Robert Berry Band along with Paul Keller. He noticed Jesse Harm out there. He goes, Jesse Harms came to see us tonight. I said, oh, that's interesting. And then I got a call from David Lauser saying, hey, man, we're looking for a singer to replace, Sam's gone, Van Halen. And I said, oh, man, this sounds like a great opportunity. I'm going to England. I'm moving. Oh, okay, well, good talking to you, whatever it was, I don't remember now. So after the few years I spent there, 3 years with GTR and 3, I came back. They still haven't found anybody for their band, except for Gary Pihl is a guitar player now, and that, even though he's playing in Boston, he left right from Sammy Hagar Band to join Boston without missing more than 2 days of work, kind of. He wants to do something outside of Boston, because in Boston you do what you're told, basically. You play what girls want. So he's got David. Jesse's doing something else. Was it with SiX or REO? Or something. He's taken off to do something else. So they get Alan Fitzgerald, who was the bass player in Montrose, but the keyboard player in Sammy's band for a while. So now Alan Fitzgerald, David Lauser, Gary Pihl, and they want me to still be the singer and bass player. And they said, why don't we get together at Sammy's house up in Marin and give it a try? I went, son of a gun. I'm a huge Sammy Hagar fan. I just think that guy's dynamo, Everything he touches is gold. And he was a lot of energy around here in the Sammy Hagar Band days. He was just really impressive. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to go to Sammy Hagar's house. Yeah, I'll do this. Yeah. So we go there and we record a bunch of songs in his basement. And everybody has ideas, and we all write songs. Except for David Lauser didn't write at that point, but he was a great drummer. And that's how it got together. We, at the end of that 2 days at Sammy's, we looked at each other and said, this is a band. This works. We like this sound. And Fitz, who was a Night Ranger keyboard player too,
Right, sure.
said, I'm going to go to my manager from Night Ranger and see if he wants to represent a new band. So it seemed like we had all the parameters kind of set to do something. The problem was that grunge was coming in, and you know, Nirvana was the flavor of the day, not Alliance, kind of. You know, Alliance was still... Well, Alliance actually had a little more of a 70s kind of rockin' sound than an 80s rockin' sound, I think. And so we never really... the management couldn't get us a big record label, and Khalil found me in some way. So I sent him the songs. I said, this Alliance thing's pretty good, you know, and I thought Khalil seemed pretty well connected at a pretty big label. It turned out that it's a small label, but he's pretty well connected. So we that's how we got with Khalil, and we've done 4 albums for him.
Yes. The first album was came out in Japan under Bond of Union, and Khalil put it out under Alliance self-titled, and I think there were a couple of songs that were different on both releases.
Yeah, a couple of different things, and I think we had a few things maybe from Sammy's basement studio on there too. I don't remember exactly now. That's a long time ago. That's a lot of album. That's a lot of songwriting ago for me. And I was, even at that time, I mean, Gary had some music and stuff, but I was still writing all the melodies and words and stuff for the songs. And I look at how many songs I've written sometimes, and I go, what the hell? Because I'm looking at, you know, writing these things for 6x6, and I'm doing all the lyrics. I'm thinking, I don't want to write the same thing over and over again. And so I sort of check them. I go, well, I haven't, you know, and I don't know where the ideas come from, but evidently, for being just a dumb musician, I say in my best New Jersey kind of accent, for being a dumb musician, things strike me in the world that I don't really realize until I sit down to write a song. It's just kind of weird. Hey? Anyway, that's how Alliance came together, and we're still friends. In fact, we're working really hard on a new album right now, and I expect probably, it won't be May because 6x6 is coming out to do drums and guitars and new videos and stuff in May for the second album, and probably maybe July, Gary and David will be out here, and we'll finish up the next Alliance album.
I'm looking forward to that, yeah. I wanted to focus on, out of the Alliance albums, my favorite is Road to Heaven. I thought that was like the real standout for me. And the first 3 songs on the album, Road to Heaven, I Can Breathe, which is my all-time favorite Alliance song.
Yeah.
I Can Breathe is just a phenomenal song, and Make a Stand. Where was your writing at that point? Because I thought that album in particular was just, the songwriting was so strong.
You know, I will say that I Can Breathe was a struggle for me because Gary sent me that. No, he was actually here. We worked our songs out together as far as the music, but they leave me with music. There's no words, no lyrics, you know, no melody. And I Can Breathe has some weird timing in it. I kept chopping it up and changing it where it at least felt kind of smooth. And I Can Breathe, honestly, when Hush was touring through the Midwest, and we drive through Nebraska, and we drive through all that Midwest area with all the fields and everything, the farms, it really left an impression on me because my dad had a ranch here in the valley. His parents had a ranch. He was raised on it. And even though when I was growing up, there was, you know, a lot of buildings and stuff here, they talked about the ranch and the fruit trees and all the stuff. And I'm out there in the Midwest thinking, God, this sort of feels to me like it must have been when my parents were raised here in the Silicon Valley, which was the Valley of Heart's Delight, they called it, because all the fruit for the world came from here. And I just started writing about this, you know, in the fields of Nebraska. You know, it's sort of like John Fogerty writing about the Cajun thing, Born in the Bayou and all. He lived up in Marin here. You know, he wasn't a Bayou guy at all. But things just sort of came out that meant something to me when I heard this guitar riff that Gary did. And the same thing was the first song in the album.
Road to Heaven, which is, it could actually be like a CCM type of a Christian hard rock song.
You know, that's probably my favorite on the album, actually. I write positive stuff mostly. I can't help it. I'm just inspired by things that, you know, let's fix this, let's move forward kind of stuff. Let's be happy. Let's, you know, do well for others, you know, and take care of the circle of influence you have. Don't worry about everything else. You know, you can only influence and fix so many things or help so many people. But that's the kind of stuff I write about and I think about. And I just felt on that album, it kind of came together. But it took 6 years or so for that album to be put together, if I remember right.
Yeah, there was about 5 or 6 years in between records, yes.
Yeah, and you know, I always say this to a lot, because I produce a lot of people recording in my studio. Every day is a different day. Every day you wake up, if you're writing, even in your journal or, you know, for a newspaper, writing songs, every day looks a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you leave it and you're thinking something else, you know? And that album, that ran the gamut for me. Make a Stand was written for my daughter. My daughter in high school, all the friends she was with became kind of upwardly mobile, and I don't want to call them Kardashians because there wasn't that type of thing, but they were going to big colleges and successful, and she just wanted nothing to do with that. She kind of went the other way, you know. I don't want that. I don't need the popularity and the fancy clothes and all the stuff, and she ran away from home for 2 weeks. So it was really upsetting to me. That's not the kind of family I was trying to raise, you know, where somebody's not happy. But she just rebelled against whatever was happening in school. And a friend of hers told me where she was. And I found her, grabbed her, put her in the car, and took her to a tough love camp in Utah. I didn't let her get out of the car. I just drove her there. And as hard as it was, I signed away my parental rights for 3 months to that child, because at certain points, I believe your kids aren't going to listen to you and they need to toe the line. It was almost like going in the military, you know, and that was so hard on me, but I had to make a stand if I was going to save her from where she was heading, and she needed to make a stand. She had to kind of come back, I don't know, into the real world, whatever, into a hard for me to talk about. Today, that girl is an amazing human being. She is really strong. She wanted to have a ranch. She's engaged to a guy. They bought a ranch up in the hills here. She has 2 donkeys, 3 horses, 9 head of cattle, and she has a horse trailer that has been all redone, like with a bar and stuff in it, where she does catering for parties, where she pulls this horse trailer that's all gold and white for weddings, different things. She is so amazing, and it's as hard as it is for me to talk about what her and I had to go through with her. I feel so good that she came through the other side, the person that she is, and Make a Stand was her song.
Wow.
That's a great song. Your vocals on that are tremendous. The first 3
Oh,
songs
thanks.
on that album the whole album's great, but the first 3 songs, I think, out of all the Alliance stuff, is really like the pinnacle of the writing of the band on that particular album.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I know when that album was done, we felt really good about it, you know, but it took a while. It's funny too, because we had a lot of that album, actually not a lot that's on that album. We had a lot of songs, and I was, I'm kind of the guy that's put them all together. I have the studio, I write the lyrics and stuff, and if I'm not happy, it doesn't go anywhere. And I was not happy with what we had until that last jump where we got Road to Heaven and Make a Stand. And it was just all of a sudden there it was. And, we're doing the same this time. It's been, I'm not sure, been 4 years since that album. I don't know, maybe longer, huh?
Longer, because you had Fire and Grace that was after that.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. That was, I think, 2019, Fire and Grace.
That's right. Yeah, so we've been a few years since the last one, and it just wasn't happening. And all of a sudden, I wrote a couple songs, Gary wrote a couple songs. I finished up lyrics that I think are good. And now David Lauser has a new song we worked on, and he's having a lot of fun writing. And I think now we have enough material to get another Alliance album out.
And what label will this be coming out on?
I'm not sure. I am going to demand, I know that sounds kind of pushy, but I'm going to demand that somebody does a much better job for Alliance that's ever been done before. And if Khalil wants to be that guy, I love the man. He's wonderful. He's been good to me. But this, this could be the last Alliance album. Who knows? And it's really good. It's got some great stuff on it. It will be our heaviest album, too, since Missing Piece was a pretty heavy album. And it's going to be much heavier guitar stuff.
What about the All for One project? Was that a one-off? Was that a Frontiers special, a one-off project that they put together, or was that ever a band of any kind?
First of all, let me tell you, all those guys, of course, Gary Pihl's in there, but Matt, a great drummer, right? Terry Brock, great singer. All the guys are great. I personally, at the time where I said I would do that because Gary was involved, there was nothing going on. And then all this stuff happened with Ian and stuff, and I was really sorry I did that album. Not that I dislike it, but I don't want to be in any projects. I want to be in a real band. Alliance is a real band, even though we don't tour.
Right.
We have history. We're like a brotherhood. We love each other. We know each other's wives, our kids. Alliance is probably the band I should have had when I was 18, and we would have done stuff, But to be in a band that's put together just for the sake of putting an album out, nothing else, I should have done that. I'm still kicking myself. And like I said, it's not a bad album, but it's a little bit of the cookie cutter that Frontiers puts out.
Oh yeah.
But they do an ad. I get them because Serafina was really good to me with the 3.2 albums. Those couldn't have been handled better. But I get their stuff on Facebook Reels and all that, and they'll have their ads, and they'll have like 3 or 4 different bands that are on each for like 15, 20 seconds. And when it's the next band, you can't tell if it's the same singer or not. They all sound the same.
Yeah.
It's just really weird, and it's good music, but it's all that I call fake Whitesnake kind of stuff.
Yes. Well, they've tapped into the whole Swedish scene. They've either taken over bands that were established before Frontiers, or they've created bands out of those bands. And those guys are all out of the David Coverdale School of Singing, which is fine. But,
which is fantastic. But.
Right. But it's highly redundant, and like they have certain established bands on their roster that they obviously can dictate to, but the vast majority of these bands, it's AOR, melodic hard rock by the numbers.
Yeah.
And that's not the place for you. It's not, even for a guy like Terry Brock, that's not the place for him really either. But
yeah, and we get a Steve Perry clone once in a while, which is always nice to hear. But it's just not what I should have done, And it didn't hurt me in any way, except for that it's a project, and I have 2 real bands that I'm in, and 6x6, of course, is the most important thing maybe I've ever done. I think it's going to do better than 3 did with Keith, because we're going to have longevity, and the ideas are just so flowing, and because it's guitar based, it has a wider audience. South America is really big for us. Germany, big for us. I think it's done fairly well in the U.S. It's poised to grow more.
Is there a Jap deal in the works?
I do not know why. Frontier's always had me in Japan. Inside Out and Sony, it's a Sony label, is in Japan, and we didn't get a Japanese deal. And I think it has to do with what Inside Out is negotiating or something with them. I'm not sure. I haven't got to the bottom of that because it's been so much work with the first album, and now they want another one. And I'm spending so much time on that I don't want to think about the business too much, or else I can't write songs.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the 3.2 albums that came out in the last several years. How did they all come about? You talked about Frontiers kind of treating you well with those. How did that all come about?
I'm trying to think of when I first saw Keith. Now, Keith and I had done different things over the years. We stayed friends, and he lived in Santa Monica, which in my mind was probably the worst thing he could have ever done. He should have gone back to England where they know how to treat geniuses and stuff, but he moved to the U.S. where everything's cookie cutter, and I'd see him once in a while. I saw him at the NAMM show, and Serafino had been bugging me for a 3 album for 10 years or so. We need another album like that, and can't you get them together? I said, no, I didn't want to talk to Keith about it because he's the one that broke it up. He got letters that said that 3 was ruining his career, and he took it to heart, and he broke us up. And I don't want to bring that up and put that in our friendship. Well, they put out a 3 live album, and I don't know what year it was, 2015 maybe, and 3 live in Boston.
Yes.
And Keith signed off on the contract. He had some money. I'll sign off on it. I was really excited. Sure, some money, but hey, this was a big point in my life, 3, and it's going to come back out. When they got it all pressed and released it, they sent us a copy. And Keith, who liked to stay home with a glass of wine and listen to music, he thought he'd put it on. And it blew him away how good we were, which still brings a smile to my face because he called me immediately. He goes, Robert, yeah, Keith. He goes, we were a really good band. Mm. And I said, well, I always thought so. He goes, yeah, no, but the jamming and the fire and the playing, he was so excited because he had left it behind from the criticism of the people who wanted Greg Lake back in the band and didn't understand that late 80s, going to 90s, that even Yes was doing songs in their music, adding choruses and stuff.
Right.
And he was excited, and I thought, well, here's my chance. Keith, this guy's been bugging me at this really big label. Would you ever want to do a follow-up? I said, I get pretty good money from him. He goes, maybe. And there it was. I think, all right. I said, can I call Serafino and ask him what they're talking about? Like, okay, yeah, get back to me. I called Serafino, said, Emerson's on the hook. What can you offer? He got a lot. I got a lot of money for Emerson, and good money for me, but a lot for Emerson. And Carl wouldn't do it, and that wasn't something that Keith cared about because he wanted to work with somebody else. We were going to use Simon Phillips. Him and Keith were friends, and he's a great drummer. And so Keith said, okay, all right, let's get going. I said, you know what? Let's do a couple songs before we sign a contract because I don't want to get stuck with something that we can't perform what we say we will. And when I called Serafino back, it was kind of funny. I said, well, Keith's in, but he wants another 10 grand. Right? Keith said that, but I thought, you know what? Keith was saying, who really cares about about the music and so nobody cares about what I do, and I wanted to prove to him they did. And he goes, well, you should be my manager. I said, well, these guys really want it, Keith. They like what you do. They want what you do. He goes, wow, okay. And we started working, and of course, he had other problems at home and with health and different things that I wasn't aware of. I was aware of a few things. I knew about his arm. I knew that he had a little bit of a heart problem, but I just didn't know, I didn't know that he was, depressed a little bit and had, I don't know. I don't really want to talk about that. It's just kind of very sad. If he would have been watched and taken care of a little bit better, he would have been alive today. And that's really hard for me to accept that he wasn't watched in the condition he was in. For a year, I didn't want to do anything with it, even though I had the keyboards on 7 songs, and I was really happy with where we were going, and Keith was. And I was talking to his son, Aaron, and of course, Aaron was very upset about what happened with his dad, and he goes, God, why would you do that? And I said, they want me to finish this album there. And he goes, I said, would you consider doing it with me? He goes, wow, that'd be interesting. She goes, send me a song. So I sent him a song. He got right back at me. He goes, oh, I can't play like my dad. I play, but I'm just kind of a jamming guy, because nobody plays like Keith, of course.
Yeah.
So I told the record company that, and I said, I tell you what, I'm going to try to finish it, because they know I play keyboards. I started as a keyboard player. I had lots of 8 years of classical piano, 2 years of jazz, majored in music in college. I can play keyboards. Not like Emerson, but I struggled for a year and finished it up seamlessly with the parts we already had with his. And sound, I have a Moog, I have all the things, some keyboards he got me. And I finished it up, and the record company liked it. They said, we got to put this out. This is really great. And the Emerson estate wouldn't let me put it out. I said, well, Keith and I, we're going to do this. You can stop me? Yes. We don't want him known as a rock and roll keyboard player.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what known as? We want him known as a composer. I said, you're kidding me, right? This is the Jimi Hendrix of the keyboards. This is the guy that stabbed knives. I mean, yeah. He's like, sure, yeah, he's a composer, but he's the only keyboard player to inspire millions of keyboard players and entertain everybody like a guitar player.
Yeah.
I said, you're kidding. And they weren't kidding. They stopped me from doing it. And I kept saying, I really like to do this. And, well, we haven't got together with the tribunal, whatever they called it, And I was quite upset. I finally said, you know what? I figured out how to solve this. And there was this one lady that was sort of the point person for me with this thing. I said, nobody but me knows what Keith and I did. Nobody. I've sent something to Aaron. He's heard a couple songs, but he doesn't know if that's me or his dad, to be honest with you. And nobody knows except for me. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this album out, and I'm not going to put Keith's name down for writing, for playing, for nothing. Nobody's going to know. I'm just going to say it's me. And they said, why would you do that? I said, so I could put out this album because you're stopping me from doing it. So there'll be no money for the estate. There'll be no credit for the Emersons. And, of course, I would never do that because Keith meant much to me to do that. But I wasn't going to let them stop me without a fight.
No, you called their bluff.
Yeah, and I got an email a couple of days later. Okay, we've decided that you can go ahead and use all that, but you can't use his actual physical playing. You'll have to replay the parts since you say you can play. So they didn't think I'd be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I already done it, filling in all the parts that we didn't have.
Right.
Yeah.
So in another 3 or 4 months, recreating every nuance that he had done already, which broke my heart.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like a Xerox copy. It's not like it's not him. It's exactly what he played, exactly the keyboard, exactly the sound, everything about it. It's just his finger didn't push the key at that point.
Right.
And I brought a famous writer down here, Neil Prasad, who has a great website. And I played him side by side, Emerson's playing and my playing. And I asked him what he thought. He says, give me a minute. I'm having a real hard time, digesting that that's not Keith when you switch over. Because I just switched back and forth and you couldn't tell the difference. And that's when I knew I had at least done the right thing as far as recreating sort of the sound and the style and what we wanted this album to be. So that's how those came about. And I tell you, Frontiers was into it, and it must have done 100 interviews for each album. It was labor intensive, but it was well worth it because it was important to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it continued that legacy of Keith Emerson, and even though you talk about the problems you had there, and with the estate and stuff like that. But I mean, it was really a tribute to him, I guess, in a way, right?
Well, for me, it was. I didn't want it to be that to the audience so much. I wanted them to think of it as another 3 album, what we would have done with the knowledge we had gained over from the first time we had put out an album to when that was being worked on. And it came across that way, luckily. So it could have been really looked down upon that I finished that album after he died.
Yeah.
I was worried about that because I wanted it to be a tribute to him and to what 3 meant and did, but I didn't want to tarnish the reputation either, and I could have.
Yeah.
But people had open arms. It was really nice. There was no bad reviews. Nobody said unkind things, and they certainly could have if they wanted to be the trolls that are so popular today,
Mm-hmm.
So it was good.
So there's 3 albums. 2021 was Third Impression.
Yes.
Would there ever be any more, or is this kind of you put it to bed now?
No, that's why when my manager said, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "I will not do a 3 album without Keith." And I had material. And actually, the Third Impression, the third album of 3, was a transition album. And it actually starts with a song that's a lot of acoustic guitar, the whole intro to it. And I thought either I'm going to bring the music fans that I have along with me into this more guitar direction, or they're just going to say, forget this guy, without the keyboard thing, without Keith, we want nothing to do with him. And it wound up that song was one of the favorites of a lot of people, and it was mostly guitar. And so I thought I made that transition. That was before, though, I had met Ian Crichton, of course. And that was my plan to go in a more guitar direction, but I hadn't thought about how or with who I was going to do that with.
Yeah. So it's 6x6, full steam ahead right now in your life, right?
Definitely. Well, but I'm working on a new Alliance album because I have all the songs ready for SiX.
Oh yeah, right.
I'm just waiting. Yeah, I'm waiting for Ian to do his next version of them with what he fills in the guitars and everything. Then it comes back to me, and hopefully before May when Nigel's out here and we do some drums. So I'm on a hiatus from 6x6 writing wise or recording wise. And I have a recording studio here that's a state of the art, a Neve console and everything. A great drum set, Hammond B3, everything's here. Great Yamaha grand piano. And I run a business 5 days a week for people coming to record. So when I am working on my own stuff, I sort of take that time away from the studio business, which is fine, but that's the way I make my living too, in between things,
Before we let you go, though, Robert, I got to ask you one thing. I have a friend by the name of Andy who lives down in Georgia, and he's a huge fan of yours, but he's also a big fan of the band Tempest. And I know this is a band that you have history with. They are an Oakland, California based band, and you've produced a number of their albums over the years. I guess you would call them kind of like almost like a Celtic rock band in a way. They got like some fusing
Definitely
European and American folk with prog and everything.
Yep.
And he wanted me to ask you, he had a question. He wanted me to ask you about how did you kind of get hooked up with them, number one, but number two, I know in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic that we had these social distancing type of things where a lot of artists did stuff over the internet. And you did a couple shows, I guess, social distancing shows with them where I think you played keyboards.
No, I actually had them in the studio and I recorded them live and put it out on, I forget what it was, FaceTime Live or whatever it was.
Right.
Facebook Live, something like that. And I play keyboards on their album. I do it at Hammond B3. And I think I've produced 13 albums. I mean, a lot of albums for them because they've done Caliban, the acoustic thing, and another thing down here. A lot of work with Leif Sorby, who's the leader of Tempest.
Mm-hmm.
And he even did a little bit of work on the Wheel of Time soundtrack that I did. And I wanted to, during that time period where COVID was ravaging the country, I got my first booster shots, but at that point, I was one of those guys who said, I'm really healthy. I think the only way I'm going to get past this is if maybe I get COVID every year. And some people said, well, you're stupid for thinking that. I said, I know, but that's kind of what I'm thinking now, because I think this is going to dumb itself down and we're going to be okay. So that's my prediction. And I called Leaf and I said, Leaf, if you guys are good, as long as you are sort of your family, that you guys still rehearse and write together, you get together, and you're not going to bring any, COVID germs in here outside of things. I want to do some live stuff for you here, and you guys can sell it, make some money, and it'll help you survive during this time, because that's all Leaf does. Tempest is his business, and I want them to survive. So I gave them that time, and we had, it was really good. The band was superb. The recordings came out great. Everything it needed to be. It was just one of those magic things during a time when a band couldn't make any money touring that worked out pretty good. I don't know if that answered the question quite. But
no, that's kind of veered off a little
I'm
bit.
locking up the studio here because I have to meet somebody for dinner in a little bit. Teddy Clemente is going to do another album. Okay. And Teddy's got a heavy metal thing, and that I sort of, he gets his songs together, then I finish the writing on them to kind of tune them up, and David Lauser flies in to do the drums. I do the bass. He has a singer and a couple of guitar players, and he puts the rest together, and they're good albums. But we're meeting for a pre-album dinner. That's it.
Nice. All right. Well,
we'll let you go.
Yeah, we'll let you go. And so we appreciate your time, and it was a great talk. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it very much.
Well, I appreciate talking to you guys. I tend to blab a lot and get off track and everything else.
No, you were on point. Believe me, we've dealt with some blabbers. You're not one of them.
Yeah, great. Well, I appreciate that you guys knew a little of the history and stuff too. And there's some albums that I'm really proud of. A lot of people don't ask me about, especially Taken Aback and In These Eyes. That's that was an important time of my life because there wasn't a lot else going on. I mean, I was playing with Sammy Hagar, but Sammy Hagar is Sammy Hagar. He's not Sammy Hagar and Robert Berry,
Right.
So,
right.
It's good to hear that people still know about those. And I hope to talk to you guys again when 6x6 comes out with the new one.
Yes, we'll definitely be in touch. Thanks again. Take
care.
All
right.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
In the fields of Nebraska, you can see beyond the wind. You can ride until you're exhausted from the beauty you take in. Look down from the highest mountain, through miles and miles of life. Heavy heads working hard to find comfort in their strife. And you can feel the earth alive beneath your feet, and your senses come alive with the peace that it brings. I can breathe. Oh, now can't you feel it? I can breathe. Oh, now can't you feel it? I can breathe. Yeah, look around and forget the way. I can breathe. In the calm of the valley, you can barely hear a sound. Alone with the elements, shut your eyes, touch the ground. And the people that surround you, it seems like they've always known. With the hands that make a living, to tend the crops as they grow. And my soul feels like it grew up in